Thought I'd do a quick late night video from my hotel room in Venice ahead of my train tomorrow to Udine for the European Super Cup final between Tottenham and Paris Saint-Germain. Funnily enough, we're going to be discussing a bit of Spurs, but I wanted to discuss the state of play really with Arsenal outgoings. Obviously, it's been widely reported today that Tottenham are back in for Eberechi Eze, so I wanted to discuss where that leaves Arsenal really, and where they're at with trying to get some of these fringe players out of the door. So I dropped a piece on Saturday night on the Mirror in the aftermath of Arsenal's 3-0 win over Athletic Bilbao, which was basically discussing the kind of collective push from both Arteta and Andrea Berta to get some of these players out the door to free up some extra funds to spend, because Mikel Arteta was asked on Saturday evening whether he considered Arsenal's incoming business done, and he very much left the door open. Obviously, the focus this week has been on the Premier League opener on Sunday at Manchester United. But in the background, there's been a few things bubbling behind the scenes, although again, it's nothing too concrete. So for anyone watching this video who's expecting bombshell updates, unfortunately we're not quite there at this moment in time. But the key really is that obviously Spurs are back in for Eze. About 6 weeks ago now, sources close to the club have basically said that they sort of called their interest to an extent. Eze has of course had that time sensitive release clause written into his Crystal Palace contract. Mixed reports on whether that's actually expired, and I've not been able to confirm that, unfortunately. Last year, I know it expired on the day of the opening game of the season, which is when Manchester United played Fulham. I did discuss that in a previous video, but there have been some suggestions that Eze's release clauses may be expired in the past sort of 10 days or so. But ultimately, it's not too relevant, because from what I understand, Crystal Palace are really firm in their valuation of the player, and that even if to say the release clause has expired, they're not going to let him go for much less than that. So the figure that was initially mooted was around about 68 to 67 million pounds, a 60 million bulk fee with the rest made up in add-ons, so to speak. Again, Tottenham have reignited their interest. Obviously, they've lost James Maddison to a cruciate knee ligament injury. He's undergone surgery, which was successful. And Spurs have also been in talks with Manchester City over a deal for Savinho. We know Arsenal have been keen on Eze, but as I mentioned in the previous video, sources close to the club have kind of downplayed the interest in Eze in recent weeks, from what I've understood. Nothing seems to be sort of imminent or on the agenda in regards to an approach for Eze. At one point, it did look as though Arsenal were ready to formalise their interests, because they'd held several rounds of talks with his representatives and actually received encouragement that Eze would 100% be open to the deal. Obviously, he was previously released by Arsenal, and from what I understand, a large amount of his family are Arsenal supporters. He's, of course, a London boy. So for the chance to potentially move to, one of the biggest clubs in England would of course be of interest. But the problem is, Arsenal have done the crux of their business already. They've strengthened all the key areas of the squad that they'd like to. But the sticking point really is that there's a sense that Arsenal probably won't do another significant transfer until they start to move some of the players out the door. A bit of a bloated squad, so to speak. Some of the players that have been sort of in and around the bench are players that are ultimately not in Mikel Arteta's plans. The likes of Sambi, Lokonga. Zinchenko's had minutes, but he's not really part of Arteta's plans anymore. Fabio Vieira, there's no real way back for him at the club now following his loan spell with Porto. So I wanted to run through some of those situations. So for Sambi Lokonga, I mean, he's not a player that's going to generate Arsenal huge cash anyway. But from what I understand, they've just struggled to generate interest. They've tried to sort of find solutions for him, but the interest has been minimal. following his loan spell with Sevilla. Of course, he made quite an impression on loan at Luton the previous season. The latest club to show an interest are Greek side PAOK. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that right. But I spoke to a journalist that covers PAOK, and from what I understand, they've been in discussions with Slavia Prague for a separate midfielder. So Lokonga features on their shortlist. Whether he's actually a priority at this moment in time, I'm not so sure. But that's a situation which could likely develop in the coming days, when we will truly see whether PAOK are at the table for Lokonga. But from what I understand, as I said, they've struggled just to find options for him. With Zinchenko, there's been a lot of strong links to Fenerbahce, suggestions and offer has been made. Ultimately, Fenerbahce have shown quite a bit of ambition in this window. Of course, bringing in John Duran, they've got quite a seasoned squad now, likes of Fred, Sofian Amrabat, Youssef En-Nesyri. They actually played tonight against Feyenoord in the Champions League, and there was some real sort of ex-Premier League names on the bench, the likes of Kaglo Soyuncu, the former Leicester defender. But Archie Brown scored. Now, he's a young English left-back that they signed from Belgium, and at this moment in time, Fenerbahce's interest in Zinchenko will ultimately hinge on whether Mourinho feels he's suited to a midfield role, which we know he's played with Arsenal. I think Arsenal would probably look to recoup a credible fee for Zinchenko because he is a player of great experience. We know that on his day, he can be sort of a real sturdy and quality player. But the emergence of Archie Brown, who actually scored tonight against Feyenoord, means Fenerbahce are not sort of actively pursuing a left-back, which is, of course, Zinchenko's primary position, although in his earlier days he was a sort of an attacking midfielder. So it would depend ultimately on how much Arsenal were willing to demand. But I think the key really is that Zinchenko is on significant wages and he's also out of contract next summer. And, you know, at this stage, when there's not been too much concrete interest, there was an inquiry from AC Milan earlier in the window. You could understand if he sort of seek to run down his deal, because that would strengthen his hand next summer to earn a similar wage packet, but also to have a pick of other options. Because at this moment in time, it's clear that if he was to leave Arsenal, he probably would have to take a pay cut, really, to facilitate a move of any such. But I do still expect him to depart. I think Arsenal are very much comfortable with letting him leave because they've got Ricardo Calafiori and Miles Lewis-Skelly as cover at left back. So he's very much in the shop window. But again, they've just struggled to generate that interest. There's been a few loose inquiries. Atletico Madrid had showed interest sort of towards the end of last season. But again, nothing concrete, unfortunately. And you have to say, you know, on the face of it, he is one of Arsenal's most sellable assets. And, you know, they should really be recouping a fee of sort of £15 million for a player of Zinchenko's quality. But the fact he's out of contract really does weaken their position. And, of course, buying clubs know that Arsenal were desperate to get some of these players out of the door. Just on Reiss Nelson, the Fulham interest is very much ongoing. I've checked that today. 100% a player that Fulham remain interested in. Obviously, he spent last season on loan at Craven Cottage, but he had a hamstring injury in February, which required surgery. Fulham have also been pursuing a deal for Shakhtar Donetsk winger Kevin, which was first reported by Fabrizio Romano. Now, I've spoken to Shakhtar today just to make a check on that, and they actually say that they've only received one offer to date from Fulham, whereas it has been reported that Fulham have made two bids, one which is worth a club record fee. Now, my understanding is that Fulham are prepared to pay a club record fee for Kevin, but at this moment in time, Shakhtar are saying they've not received a second offer, which I found interesting. But for anyone wondering whether that's going to affect their interest in Reiss Nelson, I don't believe so, because ultimately, while Kevin is the focus at this moment in time, Marco Silva is very much open to adding two wide players, because Adama Traore is a player that could leave the club this summer. There's been interest from Nottingham Forest. Of course, Adama was brilliant under Nuno at Wolves previously. And I do expect Nelson to depart. Obviously, he made an impression in pre-season, but it's clear he's way down the pecking order. Gabriel Martinelli's first choice. Leandro Trossard is ahead of him also. So Arsenal are looking to move Nelson on, and they will demand a decent fee for him as well. Have various loan spells with Hoffenheim, I believe, Feyenoord, of course, Fulham last year. A very good player on his day, but has had various fitness issues recently. But initial talks between Fulham and Arsenal, Fulham were trying to potentially structure a loan deal, whereas Arsenal would favour a permanent move. So at this moment in time, discussions are ongoing, but have kind of slowed, while Fulham have pivoted to Kevin to try and get that big move in for the young Brazilian exciting talent. From what I understand, Kevin would need to be convinced of a move to Fulham, because he's had a host of other top European clubs that have been interested in monitoring his situation, such as Napoli. A few German clubs as well have also looked at him. So work to do. Fulham very much trying to strengthen their team, and Nelson is still a player that's on their shortlist. Fabio Vieira is another strange one, of course. Went back to Porto last summer, and you kind of had the sense that, you know, you felt he could maybe restore some of his value, but it just didn't really happen. He went to the Club World Cup, was given an extended break by Arteta, and as I said on Saturday, he was not in the squad for Saturday's game against Athletic Bilbao, but he actually took part in a post-game training session, which was observed very closely by Mikel Arteta. I think Fabio Vieira is a player that, if he was to stay at the club, he would probably get some minutes in the Carabao Cup, but he's not a player that's in Arteta's plans, and you know the club need to generate money. I think a fee sort of around £17 million would be deemed acceptable. Stuttgart have held permanent discussion over a permanent deal after they sold Enzo Milot to Al Ahly. But again, a little bit of a gap in valuation from what I understand. Porto remain a potential option for Vieira, but I think they have showed a tendency to sign some younger talents throughout this window. So we'll have to see what happens with Vieira. But again, he is a player that could generate Arsenal a decent wedge of money. But the offers just haven't been there at this moment in time. I think Jakub Kiwior as well as a situation to watch, because although Arteta would really like to keep him, the player is at a stage in his career where he wants to play, and it's clear if he remains at Arsenal, he won't be first choice, because Gabriel and Saliba, of course, are those prominent defenders at the heart of Arteta's defence. But that's not to say Kiwior wouldn't pick up minutes in the Champions League and the Premier League, because it's clear Arsenal can't play Gabriel and Saliba every week as they have in recent seasons. Both players have picked up injuries in recent times. Obviously, Gabriel underwent hamstring injury. Saliba had a back issue as well in 2023, which actually derailed Arsenal's title charge. So I do think Arsenal would maybe consider decent offers for Kiwior. From what I understand, AC Milan and Juventus are the latest teams who have long-standing interest in Kiwior to look at the player. AC Milan, of course, sold Malik Fior to Newcastle, so they're in the market for defensive reinforcements. Juventus will also look for another centre-back if they can shift Lloyd Kelly, who has been offered to a number of Premier League clubs, including Crystal Palace and Sunderland. Of course, he was at Newcastle and went to Juventus. Didn't stay at Newcastle too long. Only 6 months following his free transfer from Bournemouth. Or I believe it was a free transfer. But again, another case of Juventus' scattergun transfer policy. Of Porto had a initial loan offer with an obligation to buy rejected by Arsenal for Kiwior. It was way short of what they value the player at. It was worth around £23.4 million. Arsenal, I think, would look for at least 30 million probably for Kiwior, given that I think they signed him for around £20 million when he arrived at the club in January 2023. It was about 21 million, I think. So they want to make profit, because he proved last season Some impressive performances against the likes of Real Madrid. That, he's a very good defender. He's got a weapon of a left foot. So I don't see any reason why Arsenal should consider, sort of offers that would only make him sort of a couple of million profit, given that he has improved since he arrived at the club. I think the difficulty for Arsenal was that they would probably need to replace Kiwior just because of Calafiori's injury record. It's not too great. Obviously, Takahiro Tomiyasu has left the club as well. Calafiori obviously can play as a left centre-back. He was initially signed as, and viewed as someone that can play as both a left-back and a centre-back, but hasn't really had too many minutes at centre-half at this moment in time. So I don't see Arsenal risking selling Kiwior without kind of a replacement on the agenda. They've, of course, looked at Jeremy Jacquet from Stade Rennes, but at this moment in time, doesn't look like a deal is going to be possible because the player wants to remain in France and continue his development. But he is a player that is very much a Berta target and someone that the club are going to continue to monitor in the forthcoming transfer windows, particularly if he continues to develop at such an impressive rate. He's become an eye-catching star in France and also for the national team's under-21 side. So I think, again, moving forward, I think, we could maybe see Arsenal explore the market for a potential replacement for Kiwior if a big offer was to come in for him. But I just don't see him risking it unless it's a deal that can give them the kind of cash that would allow them to reinvest on someone that's going to improve the team. And then just the final one, Karl Hein. I mean, I've spoken about him at length. I'm surprised actually he doesn't have a future at Arsenal because he's a very reliable sort of backup goalkeeper. Of course, Arsenal have got Kepa now. But, when you consider that they'd probably sell him for a couple of million, it just doesn't feel like a great deal. But of course, with financial fair play down, these kind of sort of profits, they all add up effectively. So when Karl Hein signed a contract extension last summer before heading out on loan to Real Valladolid, Arsenal never actually announced how long his deal was for. It's believed that Hein's contract, according to Transfermarkt, expires next summer. So in this case, a loan wouldn't be feasible unless he was to sign another contract extension. If that is the case, that his deal is up next summer. Now, from what I understand and what I've reported since the pre-season tour of Asia, Arsenal are looking to get a permanent deal over the line for Hein. There has been interest from a host of clubs. Sevilla were looking at him, but they've secured a loan for Vlachia Dimos, the Newcastle goalkeeper who was signed, I think, yesterday on loan. Rangers have also shown a tentative interest, but I understand the strongest club that have looked at Hein are Levante, who were keen on a loan. But again, as I mentioned, Arsenal not really looking to do a loan deal at this moment in time. They want that permanent bid. But on all the Arsenal players that I've just mentioned, I am expecting movement. Leandro Trossard is still a situation that could change. Contract talks have definitely slowed. I've had that confirmed. But I'm also told that Trossard is a very laid-back character, that, he's not all this noise that's going on surrounding his future. Will he go? Will he stay? That he's in the shop window. It doesn't bother him at all. He's very focused on the task at hand at Arsenal. He feels he's still got a part to play. He is rated by Arteta, and I don't think Arteta will sort of get rid of him for the sake of it. It has to be the right deal. It has to be the kind of deal that generates money and allows them to strengthen that attack. There was obviously Saudi interest. He changed representatives, and a lot of people sort of speculated that he changed agents because he was looking to leave the club. But from what I understand, his former representative, who has represented him since his time at Genk, has actually been unwell. So it was a mutual, respectful parting of ways. Nothing to do with his imminent future. There has been some inquiries from the likes of Fenerbahce and Dortmund throughout the window through his representatives. There was also some teams in some teams in Italy that kind of reached out to his representative just to sort of get an update on his situation, but that's not gone very far, and that was a long time ago now, around about 8 weeks ago. So offers would be considered for Trossard, but it has to be the right deal for Arsenal. It has to be a credible fee. And I think Arsenal will very much have a list of targets that they will look to go for if they do get that cash to hand. Obviously, Eze is among them, but it looks like at this moment in time, Tottenham have sort of moved ahead of them in the race just because they have the cash to hand to spend. Son has, of course, left the club now, so they're looking for a player that can play on the left or as an attacking midfielder as well. I think they'll look to bring in both, one that can play out wide, one that can play from the middle. Eze can, of course, do both. I was actually at Oliver Glasner's press conference last Friday before the Community Shield, and it was a real sort of insightful talk because he was very open. We had 45 minutes with him, and he kind of had to answer all kinds of questions. And he was asked very directly, do you think Eberechi Eze will be a Crystal Palace player before the end of the transfer window? And he said he will play on Sunday, and that was it. So very much no guarantees. I do think, maybe that points towards, an indication that maybe Eze's release clause is still active because, if Palace hold all the cards, ultimately, even if Eze wanted to go, there's no guarantee he would leave because they're going to demand a premium fee. We're on the cusp of the new season. I think Oliver Glasner, who hasn't had many signings this summer at Crystal Palace other than Walter Benitez, a backup goalkeeper, and Borna Sosa, will be absolutely gutted to lose one of his key players. It looks like Mark Gay is obviously going to go to Liverpool. There's been interest from Atalanta and Jean-Philippe Mateta. And I think Eze would be a real blow because it's hard to replace these kind of players that can guarantee goals and assists, particularly this late in the window. So I think Palace will play hardball. Other than the discussions between Arsenal and Eze's representatives, there hasn't been too much activity, though both clubs have denied that there's been any kind of formal discussions between Arsenal and Palace for Eze. But I have heard whispers that there were some informal discussions that took place, and Palace basically made it clear that he wouldn't leave unless there was an absolute premium figure on the table. Effectively, his release clause being triggered, and I think outside of that, Arsenal were looking to or would be interested in doing a deal for below his release clause. But the kind of message from Steve Parish and the Palace sort of board, which includes Oliver Glasner to an extent, is that they're not going to consider offers below the release clause. So there would have to be a real substantial bid to get Eze out of Selhurst Park this late in the window. Eze wants to play Champions League football, so he would still be open to joining Tottenham, who, as I said, at this moment in time, look most likely to move ahead with a deal because they've got the cash to hand. But again, Arsenal sources have kind of downplayed the Eze interest in recent times. The conversations I've had have been kind of, it's not concrete that they will definitely move for him. But Arsenal really need to improve the amount of money they recoup from sales. It's been a problem since Edu was at the club. I think, as I mentioned on Saturday, Andrea Berta has done a fantastic job at getting new contracts sorted for the likes of Lewis Skelly, Ethan Wanyeri, Gabriel since he joined the club, and he's also done a stellar job at executing Mikel Arteta's top targets, the likes of Victor Gyökeres. Martin Zubamendi got over the line, although through what I understand, most of the legwork was done by Edu and Mikel Arteta last year. But he's done a great job, but his next big task, and where his expertise and his extensive contact book will be, really tested, is how much money he can recoup for some of these fringe players that Arsenal need gone. I think at this moment in time, Arsenal have only generated around 8.6 million through sales, and that's through Nuno Tavares' loan to Lazio, which was agreed last summer, being triggered, which was an obligation to buy based on certain performance-related criteria. And Marquinhos going back to Brazil with Cruzeiro, another player that was signed by Edu that, nothing, he scored on his debut, I believe, against Zurich. But other than that, just didn't do anything. Had a loan spell with Norwich, nearly joined Olympiacos, went to Nantes in France, and just didn't really take off. So tiny fees, really. And, you know, with add-ons, Liverpool have recouped 202.5 million this summer. So even though they've spent nearly 300 million, you know, the net spend, I think they're 6th in the Premier League. So they haven't spent a huge amount of money when you account for the sales. And that's not even without the revenue that Liverpool generated after winning the title last season. And of course, winning 7 of their 8 Champions League group matches. Again, Chelsea are another club that have generated great money through sales. Leslie Ugochukwu and Armando Broja have gone to Burnley for a combined 45 million. I don't quite understand why Arsenal have had such a problem generating money. But from what I understand and the conversations I've had, the interest just hasn't been there in terms of formal proposals that have allowed them to negotiate and try to get this money through the door. So I think we'll see more movement from, again, I think the sales are absolute priorities in the final weeks of the window. Arsenal want to clear out their squad and get a compact sort of 18, 19 players. Maybe slightly more, but the squad is bloated at this moment in time. So full focus on getting some of these sales, and I think we'll have more movement in the coming days, and I'll be likely across it, although as I said, I'm at the Super Cup tomorrow. But if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I will speak to you all again soon.